Welcome to Myths of the Night. Ancient stories told in whispers to guide you into calm and peaceful rest. Here, the myths of old are retold in calm voices to help you rest, reflect, and dream. Close your eyes and imagine standing on a rocky shore in the dead of night, the wind whipping through your hair as you gaze across a narrow strait of black water. On the opposite shore, barely visible through the darkness, a single lamp burns in a tower window. That light is a beacon, a promise, a lifeline connecting two souls separated by treacherous waters. Now imagine diving into those cold, turbulent waves, surrendering yourself to the mercy of currents and tides, all for the chance to hold the one you love. This is not a tale of convenience or comfort. This is a story of passion so consuming that it laughed in the face of danger, of devotion so complete that it accepted death as the price of love. This is the ancient Greek legend of Hero and Leander, one of mythology's most heartbreaking romances. A story that has echoed through more than 2,000 years of human imagination. The Hellespont. Even the name sounds like something from a dream, doesn't it? In ancient times, this narrow strait of water served as the boundary between two worlds, the dividing line between Europe and Asia. Today, we call it the Dardanelles, a waterway in northwestern Turkey that connects the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara. But to truly understand the romance of Hero and Leander, you must know this geography intimately, for the water itself becomes a character in their story, both the medium of their union and the instrument of their doom. The strait stretches approximately 61 kilometers in length, but at its narrowest point, where our story unfolds, the distance between shores measured less than a mile. Imagine standing on one bank and looking across to the other side. On a clear day, you can see the buildings, perhaps even make out individual figures moving about their daily lives. So close. Close enough to see, but impossibly far when you cannot simply walk across. The water between these shores wasn't calm or predictable. Strong currents ripped through the channel, flowing from the Black Sea toward the Aegean, creating treacherous conditions for even experienced sailors. The wind, particularly in the afternoon and evening, blew predominantly from the northwest, whipping the surface into whitecaps and swells that could capsize small vessels. On the European shore of this strategic waterway stood the ancient city of Sestos, perched on the Thracian Chersonese. This was Hero's home, a place of temples and commerce, where ships waited for favorable winds before attempting passage through the strait. Directly across the water on the Asian shore, lay Abydos, an equally prosperous trading port in the region known as Mysia or Dardania. This was Leander's city, and though the two settlements existed within sight of each other, they inhabited separate continents, separate worlds, divided by that ribbon of rushing water. The name Hellespont itself carries tragedy in its syllables. According to Greek mythology, it commemorates a girl named Helle, who fell from a flying golden ram while crossing these waters with her brother Phrixus. They were fleeing their wicked stepmother, rescued by a magical ram sent by the gods. But when Helle looked down at the waves far below, she panicked and lost her grip, plummeting into the sea where she drowned. The strait was named in her memory, the Sea of Helle, a fitting birthplace for another tale of love and loss. But this geography was more than just a setting. The Hellespont was a threshold, a liminal space between stability and chaos, between safety and danger, between life and death. Every night, when Leander entered those waters, he crossed not just from one shore to another, but from the world of reason into the realm of passion, from the ordinary into the extraordinary. The strait embodied the obstacles that lovers have always faced, the barriers that society, nature, and fate erect between souls that yearn to be together. And just as the Hellespont both divided and connected Europe and Asia, so too did it simultaneously separate and unite our doomed lovers. Hero. Even her name suggests elevation, heroism, nobility. But she was not a warrior or a queen in the conventional sense. Her realm was the sacred, her battlefield the temple, her armor the white robes of a priestess. She served Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love and beauty, dwelling in a tower in Sestos, where she had taken vows of chastity and devotion. Imagine the irony, the almost cruel poetry of it. The woman who would experience one of history's most passionate love affairs had pledged herself to eternal virginity in service to the very goddess who ruled over desire and romance. Ancient poets competed to capture Hero's beauty in words, each trying to outdo the last in their descriptions of her ethereal perfection. Her hair was said to be so lustrous that Apollo himself, god of the sun, had courted her for it, offering her a throne among the heavens if she would only become his. Her eyes held depths that could drown a man more surely than the waters of the Hellespont. Her skin glowed with a luminescence that seemed to come from within, as if she had swallowed moonlight, and it radiated through her flesh. When she moved, she seemed to float rather than walk. So graceful were her steps that witnesses could believe she was something more than mortal. But Hero's beauty was not simply physical. There was an innocence about her, a purity that came not just from her virginal state, but from her genuine devotion to her sacred duties. She performed the rituals of Aphrodite's temple with sincere reverence, offering sacrifices of turtle doves, burning incense, maintaining the sacred spaces where others came to pray for love. She lived in a tower that overlooked the Hellespont, a dwelling that kept her separate from the ordinary life of the city, elevated both literally and figuratively above the concerns of common folk. From her windows, she could gaze across the water toward distant Abydos, never suspecting that her fate approached from that direction. Her isolation in that tower reflected the paradox of her existence. She was consecrated to the goddess of love, but forbidden from experiencing love herself. She served desire, but was meant to remain immune to its pull. She was surrounded by symbols and stories of passion, but expected to view them with detachment. Her world was small, circumscribed by ritual and routine, her days following predictable patterns of prayer and sacrifice. She had accepted this life, perhaps even found peace in it, until the day she laid eyes on Leander. Leander. His name derives from the Greek, meaning lion man or man of the people, and both interpretations fit him well. He was a young man from Abydos, living on the eastern shores of the Hellespont, and by all accounts, he possessed the kind of beauty that stopped conversations mid-sentence and made people turn to stare as he passed. The ancient descriptions of Leander's appearance verge on the supernatural. Some said he was so handsome that he looked like a girl dressed in male clothing. So perfect were his features, so smooth his skin, so graceful his movements. His eyes sparkled with intelligence and mischief. His smile could melt the coldest heart. When he spoke, his voice carried honey and music, making even mundane words sound like poetry. But Leander was more than just a pretty face. He possessed physical strength and athleticism, the kind of robust health and vigor that marked him as a young man in his prime. His shoulders were broad, his arms muscular, his legs powerful from years of running and swimming. He moved with the confidence of someone comfortable in his own body, unself-conscious about his appearance, even as others constantly remarked upon it. There was an adventurous spirit in him, a willingness to take risks, to push boundaries, to test himself against challenges that would make lesser men balk. He lived a relatively ordinary life in Abydos, the son of respectable parents, with prospects for a conventional future. Perhaps he would have become a merchant like his father, or learned a craft, married a suitable girl from his city, raised children who would someday take over his business. It was a perfectly acceptable life, the kind that brings contentment to many. But Leander was not built for ordinary contentment. Something in his soul craved intensity, yearned for experiences that would make him feel truly alive. He was, in the truest sense, a romantic, someone who believed in love not as a calm companionship, but as a consuming fire, a force that could transform everything it touched. Perhaps that's why he decided to attend the festival in Sestos that fateful year. Or perhaps it was simple chance, the invisible hand of fate nudging him toward his destiny. Whatever the reason, when he boarded the boat that would carry him across the Hellespont to the celebration in honor of Aphrodite and her mortal lover Adonis, he was traveling toward the moment that would define his entire existence. Each year, the cities around the Hellespont held a solemn festival to honor Adonis, the beautiful mortal youth beloved by Aphrodite. The festival in Sestos was particularly grand, drawing visitors from all the surrounding regions. Young men came hoping to find wives. Young women came adorned in their finest clothes, hoping to catch someone's eye. Merchants set up stalls, selling everything from exotic spices to jewelry crafted from Hellespont pearls. Musicians filled the air with melodies. Dancers performed in the squares. The scent of roasting meat and burning incense mingled with perfumes and the salt tang of the sea. The heart of the festival centered on Aphrodite's temple, where priests and priestesses conducted elaborate ceremonies. This was where Hero served, and during the festival, her duties intensified. She would have been visible to the crowds, performing rituals, leading processions, her white robes standing out against the colorful chaos of the celebration. She was accustomed to being looked at during these public ceremonies, had learned to maintain her composure under the weight of hundreds of eyes. But she had never felt a gaze quite like Leander's. He saw her during the procession, and something in his chest seized up, making it difficult to breathe. She was moving through the crowd with other priestesses, carrying offerings toward the temple, her face serene with concentration on her sacred task. The late afternoon sun caught in her hair, creating a halo effect that made her seem to glow. For Leander, everything else faded away. The music became distant, muffled. The crowd disappeared. There was only her, moving through space like a dream made flesh. And then she glanced up, and their eyes met across the distance. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, this first connection. But in those seconds, entire universes shifted. Hero felt something crack open inside her chest, some sealed chamber that she hadn't known existed, suddenly flooded with light. Her step faltered slightly. Her breath caught. Who was this stranger staring at her with such intensity? Why did his gaze feel like a physical touch, like warmth spreading across her skin? Leander didn't think. Thinking was beyond him now. He simply moved, pushing through the crowd, trying to keep her in sight as the procession continued toward the temple. He had to speak to her. He had no idea what he would say, no plan, no strategy. All he knew was that if he let her disappear into that temple without making contact, something essential would be lost. Some possibility would die before it could even be born. Hero tried to focus on her duties, but her hands trembled as she placed offerings on the altar. She could feel him somewhere in the crowd outside, could sense his presence like a magnetic pull. When the public ceremonies concluded and the priestesses retreated to prepare for the evening rituals, Hero found herself making excuses to linger near the entrance, telling herself she needed fresh air, that the incense had made her light-headed, that she just needed a moment alone before the next round of prayers. That's where Leander found her, in a small courtyard adjacent to the temple, partially hidden by the lengthening shadows of late afternoon. She startled when he appeared, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a moment, they just stared at each other, neither speaking. Then Leander smiled, that warm, slightly crooked smile that would haunt Hero's dreams for the rest of her life. He introduced himself simply, telling her his name, that he came from Abydos, that he had seen her in the procession and couldn't let the day end without speaking to her. His voice was gentle but urgent, as if he too felt the strange intensity of this moment, the sense that something irrevocable was happening. Hero found herself responding, giving her own name, though protocol dictated she should have maintained distance, should have immediately returned to the other priestesses. But protocol seemed to belong to a different world, one that no longer had any bearing on this strange, crystalline present. They talked as the sun sank lower, casting the courtyard in amber light. Leander asked about her duties at the temple, genuinely interested in understanding her life. Hero found herself describing the daily rhythms of temple service, the prayers and rituals, even admitting to the occasional loneliness of her isolated existence. Leander told her about Abydos, about his family, about how he loved to swim in the Hellespont, despite his mother's dire warnings about the currents. They discovered shared interests similar ways of seeing the world, a connection that seemed to deepen with each exchange. But underneath the pleasant conversation ran a current of something else, something that made Hero's skin feel too tight, that made Leander's blood sing in his veins. This was attraction in its purest, most undeniable form. This was the thing that Hero had been warned about in her training as a priestess, the danger that could undo all her vows, the fire that could consume her careful, ordered existence. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. As darkness approached and the temple bells rang, calling the priestesses to evening service, reality began to intrude on their bubble of connection. Hero explained that she had to return to her duties, that she couldn't be seen spending time alone with a strange man. Leander's face fell, and in that moment of disappointment, Hero saw how much this conversation had meant to him, how he wasn't just some casual flirt trying to seduce a priestess for the novelty of it. He genuinely cared. He genuinely wanted to see her again. And that's when the madness began. Or perhaps it was wisdom. Perhaps it was the truest thing either of them had ever done. Leander asked if there was any way they could meet again, any possibility of continuing what had begun between them. Hero knew she should say no. Every aspect of her training, her vows, her duty screamed at her to end this now, to retreat into the safety of her prescribed role. But instead, she found herself describing her tower, explaining how it overlooked the Hellespont, how she could see the lights of Abydos clearly on certain nights. The plan came together almost on its own, as if some force larger than both of them was guiding their words. Leander would return to Abydos that night, but he would come back. He would swim across the Hellespont under cover of darkness. Hero would light a lamp in her tower window to guide him, to show him where to aim his strokes through the black water. They would have to be careful, had to ensure no one discovered their meetings. But it was possible, difficult, dangerous, utterly foolish, but possible. Before they parted, Leander took Hero's hand, and the touch sent electricity up her arm. He raised her fingers to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was both reverent and full of promise. Then he was gone, disappearing into the festival crowds, leaving Hero standing alone in the courtyard with her heart racing and her mind spinning. What had she just agreed to? What had she set in motion? That night, Hero could barely sleep. She lay in her chambers at the top of her tower, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their conversation. Part of her hoped he wouldn't come, that reason would prevail, that they would both wake up and realize the madness of what they'd planned. But a larger part of her, a part she was only beginning to recognize, desperately hoped he would. She rose before dawn and watched the sun paint the Hellespont in shades of gold and rose, her eyes searching the distant shore for any sign of movement. The days that followed were torture. Hero went through her routines mechanically, performing her duties, while her mind wandered constantly across the water to Abydos. What was Leander doing right now? Was he thinking of her? Had he told anyone about their meeting? Would he truly risk the swim? Or had he come to his senses? In Abydos, Leander was consumed by similar thoughts. He couldn't focus on anything, couldn't participate in normal conversation without drifting away mid-sentence. His parents noticed the change, asked if he was feeling well. He assured them he was fine, just tired from the festival. But fine was the last thing he was. He was on fire. He was drowning. He was more alive than he'd ever been. He spent his days preparing. He swam in the Hellespont, testing the currents, building his stamina. He timed his practice swims, calculating how long the crossing would take. The strait was treacherous, even in daylight, with currents that could drag a swimmer off course, with temperatures that could leach the warmth from your body, with waves that could overwhelm you if you weren't strong. But Leander was strong. He was also in love, and love made him feel invincible. When Hero lit her lamp, and Leander saw the beacon from across the water, he took the signal as his summons to cross the Hellespont each night to be with her. That first night, his hands shook as he stripped off his clothes on the shore of Abydos, wearing only a simple tunic that wouldn't drag in the water. The moon was nearly full, painting a silver path across the dark waves. And there, across the expanse of black water, he could see it. A single point of light in Hero's tower, steady and bright. She was there. She was waiting. She was real. He entered the water, and the cold took his breath away. The Hellespont was never warm, even in summer, fed as it was by currents from the Black Sea. But he pushed past the initial shock, beginning the steady, powerful strokes that would carry him across. He had to angle upstream to compensate for the current, had to work constantly to maintain his course toward that precious light. His muscles burned, his lungs strained. Salt water splashed into his mouth and nose, making him cough and sputter. Halfway across, doubt crept in. What if he wasn't strong enough? What if the current swept him away? What if he drowned here in the darkness with no one to know, no one to mourn. But then he would catch sight of Hero's lamp again, and renewed strength would flow into his limbs. She was waiting. She was depending on him. He would not fail her. When his feet finally touched the rocky shore beneath Hero's tower, he was gasping, shaking with exhaustion and cold. But he was there. He had done it. He climbed the rocks toward the tower, and before he could even knock, the door opened. Hero stood there, lamp in hand, her face pale with worry and relief. She had watched his entire crossing, her heart in her throat every time he disappeared behind a wave, every time the current seemed to pull him off course. They stared at each other for a long moment, and then Hero set down the lamp and reached for him, pulling him inside, wrapping him in thick blankets, running her hands over his cold skin to bring warmth back into his body. She had prepared hot wine, warm food, everything she could think of to help him recover from the swim. But Leander didn't want wine or food. He wanted her. Their first kiss was desperate, hungry. All the longing and fear and relief of that night pouring out in the press of lips and the tangle of arms. Hero had never been kissed before, had never felt the weight of another person's desire, had never known that her own body could respond with such urgent need. Every nerve ending came alive. Every touch sent sparks racing across her skin. This was what the temple murals depicted, what the love poems described, what she had spent her entire life observing from a distance without truly understanding. Leander, despite his exhaustion from the swim, found energy he didn't know he possessed. He kissed Hero's face, her neck, her shoulders, murmuring words of devotion between each caress. He told her she was beautiful, told her he would swim 1,000 Hellesponts for her, told her that from the moment he saw her in the temple procession, his life had been divised into before and after. But as much as passion pulled at them, Hero's vows held her back. When Leander's hands began to wander, seeking more intimate access, she stopped him, her voice shaking as she reminded him that she was promised to Aphrodite, that she couldn't break her sacred oath, that to surrender her virginity would be to betray everything she had committed herself to. Leander didn't force or pressure. Instead, he talked. He was persuasive, intelligent, able to frame arguments that played on Hero's emotions and her logic simultaneously. He pointed out the irony of serving Aphrodite, the goddess of love and desire, while denying herself the very experiences that Aphrodite embodied. He argued that surely the goddess would understand, would even approve of true love between two devoted souls. He suggested that virginity of the heart mattered more than virginity of the body, that Hero's pure intentions would outweigh any technical breaking of vows. His arguments were sophistry, of course, clever rhetoric designed to overcome her resistance, but they were also sincere. Leander truly believed that what they felt was blessed by the gods, that their love was too powerful, too pure to be wrong. And Hero, who wanted desperately to be convinced, found his reasoning compelling. She had spent her life in service to love without experiencing it. How could she truly honor Aphrodite without understanding what love meant? Leander's soft words and charms, along with his argument that Aphrodite, as the goddess of love, would scorn the worship of a virgin, convinced Hero, and they made love. That first union was clumsy and sweet, tinged with pain and pleasure, marked by whispered reassurances and gasped discoveries. Hero felt simultaneously like she was committing the greatest sin and experiencing the most sacred act. Her body knew things her mind hadn't learned, responding to Leander's touch with an instinctual understanding that transcended her inexperience. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in Hero's narrow bed, talking in whispers as the night deepened around them. They made plans, dreamed aloud about a future together, imagined ways they might eventually be able to live openly as lovers. But both knew that for now, secrecy was essential. If Hero's superiors at the temple discovered her relationship, she would be expelled in disgrace. If Leander's parents learned he was risking his life nightly to swim the Hellespont for a clandestine affair, they would forbid it. So they would continue to meet in darkness, would steal whatever moments they could, would live for these secret hours when the rest of the world slept. As dawn approached, Leander had to leave. The swim back would be just as difficult as the swim over, perhaps more so as exhaustion weighed on him. But he was already looking forward to the next night, already planning his Sushaispa return. Hero walked him to the door, kissed him one last time, watched as he descended to the shore and slipped into the water. She kept the lamp burning until she saw him safely reach the opposite shore, her heart clenching every time a wave obscured him from view. This became their pattern, their ritual, their reality. Night after night, through the warm summer months, Leander swam across the Hellespont to be with Hero. Their secret love affair lasted through a warm summer, with Leander crossing the strait each night guided by Hero's light. Each crossing was a test of his strength and will, but he never failed. never turned back. Never let fear or exhaustion prevent him from reaching her. The nightly swims took their toll on his body. His shoulders ached constantly. His skin became weathered from exposure to sun and salt. He lost weight despite eating heartily, the physical demands of the crossing burning through calories faster than he could replace them. But he wore his exhaustion like a badge of honor, tangible proof of his devotion. Every morning when he dragged himself back to shore in Abydos, shivering and spent, he felt a fierce pride. He had done it again. He had reached her again. He would reach her tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every night until the seas dried up or the stars fell from the sky. Hero lived for the evenings, counting the hours until darkness fell and she could light her lamp. During the day, she performed her duties at the temple with perfect attention, giving no outward sign that her entire inner world had been transformed. But inside, she was counting minutes, memorizing every detail of the previous night's encounter, anticipating the pleasures of the evening to come. She prepared special foods that Leander liked, acquired soft blankets and cushions to make her chambers more comfortable, found scented oils that she would massage into his aching muscles after the swim. Their time together was precious beyond measure. After Leander arrived, and they took care of his immediate physical needs, warming him, feeding him, tending to any scrapes or bruises from the crossing, they would make love with an intensity that seemed to grow deeper each night. Their initial awkwardness gave way to expertise, each learning the landscapes of the other's body, discovering what touches brought gasps of pleasure, what words whispered in darkness could drive the other wild. But they didn't spend every moment in physical passion. They talked for hours, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Leander told Hero about his childhood, about learning to swim in the Hellespont, despite his mother's constant worry, about the time he nearly drowned when a current caught him unprepared. Hero described her training as a priestess, the grueling memorization of prayers and rituals, the strange blend of devotion and loneliness that defined temple life. They told each other jokes and laughed until their sides hurt. They debated philosophy and theology, discovering they disagreed on certain points, but finding the arguments stimulating rather than divisive. In those midnight hours, sealed in Hero's tower, while the rest of Sestos slept, they built a world of their own, a private universe where nothing existed but their love for each other. The tower became their sanctuary, the lamp their shared symbol of hope. Every object in Hero's chambers took on sacred significance because Leander had touched it, looked at it, existed in proximity to it. The narrow bed where they made love became more holy to Hero than any altar in Aphrodite's temple. But always, too soon, dawn approached. They could judge the time by the changing quality of the darkness, by the first stirrings of birds, by some internal clock that warned them their time together was ending. Leander would dress reluctantly, and Hero would wrap herself in a robe to accompany him to the shore. They developed a parting ritual, a series of kisses and embraces and whispered promises that they would see each other again in just a few hours. Hero always waited with her lamp until she saw Leander reach the opposite shore, and he would wave to her before disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness of Abydos. These partings never got easier. Each time felt like a small death, a tearing apart of something that wanted desperately to remain whole. But the knowledge that they would reunite again that evening sustained them through the long daylight hours of separation. Their love was a secret treasure, something they held close to their hearts, protected from the world that would try to destroy it if it knew. The ancient Roman poet Ovid gave voice to the internal experiences of these lovers in his Heroides, a collection of imagined letters between mythological figures. In Heroides 18 and 19, Ovid created an exchange of letters between Hero and Leander, allowing us to enter their minds and hearts during their separation. In Leander's letter, we see a young man bursting with confidence and passion, almost cocky in his certainty that no obstacle can keep him from his beloved. He boasts of his swimming prowess, describing how he has crossed the Hellespont 7 times already, how the exercise has strengthened him rather than weakened him. There's a performative quality to his letter, as if he views his nightly swims as a kind of athletic spectacle, himself as the hero of an epic tale. He barely acknowledges the danger, dismissing the treacherous currents and cold water as minor inconveniences easily overcome by the power of his love. He writes of his impatience during the long hours of daylight, how he stands on the shore of Abydos, staring across at Sestos, willing the sun to set faster. He describes fantasizing about Hero throughout the day, replaying their previous night's encounters in vivid detail, anticipating what pleasures the coming night might bring. There's a sensuality to his words, an almost tactile quality as he recalls the feel of her skin, the taste of her kisses, the sound of her voice gasping his name. But perhaps most tellingly, Leander's letter reveals his need for Hero to appreciate fully what he's doing for her, what he risks and endures. He wants her admiration, wants her to view him as heroic, wants to be seen as exceptional. His love is genuine, but it's also tangled up with his ego, with his desire to be the romantic protagonist of a grand story. He swims not just for love, but for glory, for the pride of accomplishing what others would consider impossible. Hero's responding letter paints a very different emotional landscape, where Leander's voice brims with confidence, Hero's trembles with anxiety. She begins by trying to dissuade him from his nightly crossings, reminding him of the very real dangers he faces. She catalogues her fears in exhausting detail, listing all the ways he could die in those dark waters. What if the current drags him under? What if he becomes disoriented in the darkness? What if some predatory fish attacks him? What if he simply becomes too exhausted to make it all the way across? Her letter reveals that she spends the entire time he's in the water, paralyzed with terror, watching from her tower, jumping at every shadow, convinced that this will be the night she sees him slip beneath the waves, never to surface again. When he arrives safely, her relief is so overwhelming that it leaves her shaking. And then, all too soon, she must watch him return to the water, must endure the same torture of fear all over again. But Hero's anxiety extends beyond just the physical dangers. She voices concerns that Leander might grow tired of her, that his ardor might cool, that he might find someone else, someone less complicated, someone he doesn't have to risk death to reach. These insecurities reveal her emotional vulnerability, her awareness that their relationship exists in a precarious state. She has broken her sacred vows for him, has risked everything, and yet she has no guarantee, no security, no public acknowledgement of their commitment to each other. There's a poignancy to Hero's letter as she tries to express the depth of her love while also attempting to protect herself emotionally. She admits that she often wishes she could join him in the water, could swim alongside him rather than waiting helplessly in her tower, paralyzed by fear and longing. But she knows she doesn't have his strength, his skill in the water. She is confined to her role as the beacon, the destination, the prize waiting to be reached. There's a passivity to her position that frustrates her, even as she recognizes its necessity. Yet despite all her fears, despite her attempts to convince Leander to be more cautious, or even to stop the swims altogether, Hero's letter ultimately reveals that she cannot and will not truly ask him to stay away. She needs him as much as he needs her. The nights they spend together have become the only moments when she feels truly alive. Everything else, all her temple duties and rituals, has become hollow performance, empty motions she goes through while waiting for darkness to fall and her real life to begin. Ovid's genius in these letters lies in how he captures the fundamental asymmetry of their situation. Leander performs, acts, crosses boundaries, both literal and metaphorical. He is the active agent in their romance, the one who literally moves between worlds each night. Hero, by contrast, waits. She watches. She hopes. Her power lies in the lamp she lights, in the beacon she provides, but otherwise she is static, fixed in place by her role as priestess and by social constraints that limit women's mobility and agency. This dynamic creates a certain tension in their relationship. Leander can afford to be confident because he controls his own participation in their affair. Each night, he chooses to swim. Hero has no such choice. Once she lit that lamp the first time, once she admitted him to her chambers and her body, she became entirely dependent on his continued devotion. If he stopped coming, she would have no recourse, no way to pursue him or demand explanation. She would simply be left waiting in her tower with her lamp burning, watching the empty water, wondering what had changed. The letters also reveal Ovid's sophisticated understanding of how gender shapes romantic experience in his world. Leander's letter focuses on his own actions, his own prowess, with Hero serving primarily as the reward for his efforts. Hero's letter, by contrast, centers almost entirely on Leander, his safety, his feelings, his choices. Her selfhood seems almost to dissolve into her concern for him, as if she exists primarily in relation to his needs and desires, rather than as a fully independent being. Yet there are moments in Hero's letter where another voice breaks through, where she asserts herself with startling directness. She reminds Leander that she has sacrificed everything for him, that she has broken sacred vows, that she lives in constant terror of discovery. She has given him her virginity, her reputation, her future. What has he given her, really, besides his presence? His swims, impressive as they are, cost him physical effort, but not social standing. If their affair were discovered, he might be embarrassed, but she would be destroyed. These letters, written by Ovid in the early years of the Common Era, demonstrate how the story of Hero and Leander resonated across cultures and time periods, how it spoke to fundamental human experiences of love and longing, risk and sacrifice. Ovid understood that the most compelling romances contain tension, that perfect harmony makes for boring storytelling. The differences between Hero and Leander, the ways their perspectives diverge, make their love more complex and more real. But Ovid was not the first to tell this tale, nor would he be the last. The story's origins lie much further back in time, though pinning down exactly when and where it first emerged proves difficult. Some scholars believe it began as a local legend around the Hellespont itself, a cautionary tale told to warn young men against taking foolish risks for love. Others suggest it may have roots in actual historical events, perhaps built around a real young man who drowned attempting to swim the strait for a girl. His tragedy gradually accumulating mythological embellishments over generations of retelling. What we know for certain is that by the time we get written accounts, the story had already achieved canonical status within the Greek mythological tradition. The most complete ancient version comes from a poet named Musaeus, who lived in the 5th or 6th century CE, hundreds of years after Ovid. Musaeus composed a relatively short epic poem, about 340 lines, that tells the complete story from the lovers' first meeting through their tragic deaths. Musaeus's version emphasizes the role of Aphrodite and Eros in bringing the lovers together. He describes the festival at Sestos in elaborate detail, creating a vivid picture of the celebrations, the crowds, the religious ceremonies that provided the backdrop for Hero and Leander's fateful meeting. When their eyes first meet across the crowded temple grounds, Musaeus attributes their instant attraction to arrows from Eros's bow, the god of desire literally shooting them through the heart with magical shafts that make love inevitable and irresistible. This divine intervention is important to Musaeus's interpretation of the tale. By making the gods responsible for the initial attraction, he removes some of the moral culpability from Hero and Leander. They are not willfully choosing to break sacred vows or take foolish risks. They are victims of divine power, caught in forces beyond their control or understanding. This framing would have resonated with ancient Greek audiences who believed firmly in the gods' ability to manipulate human emotions and destinies. Musaeus also provides rich sensory details about their nightly encounters. He describes Hero's Tower in almost architectural terms, specifying its height, its construction, its position overlooking the water. He catalogues the preparations Hero makes each evening, how she perfumes her chamber, how she arranges her hair, how she positions the lamp in the window at precisely the right angle to be visible from Abydos. These domestic details ground the fantastic elements of the story, making Hero feel like a real young woman preparing for her lover, rather than just a mythological archetype. The swimming scenes in Musaeus's poem capture both the physical challenge and the emotional intensity of Leander's crossings. He describes how Leander prays to Poseidon before entering the water, asking the sea god to calm the waves and guide his path. He details the mechanics of the swim, the strokes Leander uses, how he breathes, how he navigates by keeping Hero's lamp constantly in his line of sight. When storms blow up, Musaeus describes the mounting terror as waves crash over Leander's head, as lightning illuminates the churning water, as thunder drowns out Hero's voice, calling encouragement from her distant tower. But Musaeus also emphasizes the joy, the transcendent happiness that makes all the risk worthwhile. When Leander finally reaches Hero's arms each night, when they fall into bed together, exhausted and laughing and desperate for each other, Musaeus suggests that they experience something approaching divine bliss, a pleasure that justifies any danger, any sacrifice. He quotes Leander, declaring that even if he knew for certain that the next swim would kill him, he would still attempt it for the chance to hold Hero one more time. The summer months passed in this pattern of secret meetings, but both Hero and Leander knew it couldn't last forever. The seasons were turning. Already the days were growing shorter, the nights longer. The water temperature was dropping. The winds were becoming more unpredictable, the storms more frequent and more violent. Soon it would be winter, and winter on the Hellespont was brutal, with winds that could freeze a man solid and waves that smashed ships against the rocks. They talked about what would happen when winter came, trying to make plans, to find some solution that would allow them to continue seeing each other. Could Leander risk the crossing even in bad weather? Could Hero leave her tower and find some way to meet him halfway? Could they perhaps run away together, flee to some distant place where her broken vows wouldn't matter, where they could live as husband and wife without secrecy or shame? But every solution they proposed revealed new problems. Leander, swimming in winter storms, would be suicide. They both knew that. Hero couldn't leave the temple without being missed, and even if she could, where would they go? They had no money, no connections in distant lands, no way to survive except by begging or stealing. Running away was a pleasant fantasy, but not a realistic option. Finally, they agreed on a compromise. When the weather became too dangerous, Leander would stop his nightly swims. They would endure the winter months apart, sustaining themselves on memories and the promise of spring. When the warm weather returned, they would resume their meetings, and perhaps by then would have devised a more permanent solution. Maybe Leander could find work in Sestos, could move there legitimately, and find ways to see Hero without the dangerous swims. Maybe Hero could petition to leave temple service, could claim she no longer felt called to Aphrodite's priesthood. It seemed far-fetched, but it was possible. They would make it possible. This plan brought both relief and sadness. Relief because they both recognized the madness of attempting winter crossings, because survival trumped romance in the end. Sadness because months of separation stretched before them. An eternity of loneliness and longing, with only memories to sustain them. But they assured each other they were strong enough to endure it. Their love could survive anything, even distance, even time. As autumn deepened, the swims became increasingly difficult. The water was frigid now, so cold that Leander's fingers and toes went numb within minutes of entering. The waves grew higher, choppier, unpredictable. More than once, he arrived at Hero's shore, gasping and blue-lipped, his body so cold that it took hours to warm him properly. Hero grew increasingly terrified, begging him to stop, to wait until spring, reminding him of their agreement. But Leander kept finding reasons to attempt just one more crossing. The weather wasn't that bad. He'd made it safely so many times before. They should have a proper goodbye before the winter separation. Just one more night together. One more memory to carry them through the long months apart. Hero wanted to refuse, wanted to extinguish her lamp and force him to stay safe in Abydos. But she couldn't. She needed him too. So she lit the lamp, and he came. Finally, they agreed on a specific night that would be their last until spring. They chose a date when the moon would be full, providing extra light for the crossing. They would spend that night together, would say their goodbyes properly, would make promises and plans for their reunion. And then Hero would not light the lamp again until winter had passed and the seas calmed. Leander reluctantly agreed. It would be torture, but it was necessary. They both understood that. That final agreed-upon night approached, and both lovers prepared for it with extra care. Hero gathered special foods, the best wine she could procure, candles and incense to make the evening beautiful. Leander spent the day in prayer and preparation, asking the gods to grant him one last safe crossing, one last night with his beloved before the long separation. But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. On the night before their scheduled final meeting, a massive storm rolled in from the north, bringing winds that howled like tortured souls and rain that fell in blinding sheets. The Hellespont churned into a nightmare of white caps and whirlpools, completely impassable. Leander stood on the shore of Abydos, staring across at Sestos. But he couldn't see Hero's tower through the driving rain. The storm lasted 3 days, keeping him trapped on his side of the strait, unable to reach her, unable even to send word that he was safe. When the storm finally broke, the evening air was clear and cold. The sky, that peculiar shade of deep blue that comes after violent weather. Leander stood on his familiar shore, looking across the water. He knew Hero must be worried sick, must be terrified that something had happened to him during the storm. He needed to reassure her, needed to let her know he was alive and well. And there, across the water, he saw it, the lamp in Hero's tower, burning bright and steady. She had lit the lamp, despite the fact that this wasn't their agreed-upon night, despite the fact that the storm had just passed and the water was still rough. She had lit the lamp. Did that mean she wanted him to come? Was she signaling that she needed to see him, to confirm with her own eyes that he was safe? Or had she simply lit it out of habit, not expecting him to actually attempt the crossing in these conditions? Leander debated with himself. The water was still dangerous, still rough from the recent storm. The temperature had dropped even further during the 3 days of wind and rain. Any sensible person would wait, would see the lamp as simply Hero's way of thinking about him rather than an actual invitation. But Leander had never been sensible when it came to Hero. And the thought of her waiting in her tower, worried and alone, was unbearable. He made his decision. He would swim. He would reach her tonight, would hold her and reassure her and prove once again that no force of nature could keep them apart. He stripped down, said a quick prayer to Poseidon, and entered the water. The cold was shocking, worse than anything he'd experienced before. Within seconds, his muscles began to seize up, protesting the frigid temperature. The current, swollen and strengthened by the storm, pulled at him with terrifying force. Waves slapped his face, filled his mouth with salt water, disoriented him. But he could see the lamp, that precious beacon of light, and he swam toward it with every ounce of strength he possessed. In her tower, Hero watched his progress with mounting horror. She hadn't meant for him to come tonight, had lit the lamp simply because she couldn't bear not to, because the ritual of lighting it gave her comfort during the storm's aftermath. But when she saw movement in the water, realized he was actually attempting the crossing, her blood turned to ice. The conditions were terrible. She could see from her elevated vantage point how the current was fighting him, how the waves were battering him. She wanted to scream for him to turn back, but he couldn't possibly hear her across that distance. All she could do was hold the lamp high, keep it burning bright and steady. Give him that fixed point to aim for in the chaos of churning water. She prayed to every god she could think of, bargaining shamelessly for his safety. Let him make it across, and she would give up anything, do anything, accept any punishment. Just let him live. Just let him reach the shore safely one more time. Halfway across, Leander was struggling. His arms felt like lead. His legs could barely kick. The cold had penetrated so deep that he couldn't feel his extremities anymore. His vision was starting to blur, his thoughts becoming confused. But the lamp was still there, still burning. Hero was still waiting. He just had to keep swimming, just had to keep moving forward. Not much farther now. He could make it. He had to make it. And then disaster struck. A gust of wind, stronger than any that had come before, screamed across the water and up the face of Hero's tower. The lamp flame flickered wildly. Hero cupped her hands around it desperately, trying to protect it from the wind. But the gust was too strong, too sustained. The flame died, plunging her into darkness. For a moment, Hero couldn't process what had happened. The lamp had gone out. After all these months, through all those nights, it had never gone out. She fumbled frantically for flint and steel, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip them. She had to relight it, had to give Leander his beacon. He was out there in the dark water, and she had failed him. In the Hellespont, Leander had been watching the lamp, using it to orient himself, to keep his strokes aimed in the right direction. When it suddenly went dark, he felt a moment of pure panic. Where was he? Which direction was the shore? The current had been pushing him sideways. Without the lamp to correct his course, he had no way of knowing if he was swimming toward Hero's tower or away from it, toward safety, or out into the open sea. He treaded water, spinning in place, searching desperately for any sign of light from Sestos. His teeth were chattering uncontrollably now. His limbs felt strange, disconnected, not quite under his control. The cold was winning. He could feel it stealing his strength, his coordination, his ability to think clearly. But he couldn't give up. Hero was there, somewhere in the darkness. He just had to find her. He picked a direction that felt right and started swimming again. But without the lamp to guide him, he was swimming blind. The current caught him, spinning him around, dragging him off course. a wave crashed over his head, and this time he couldn't quite make it back to the surface before another one hit. Water filled his lungs. He coughed, sputtered, tried to breathe, but inhaled more water instead. His body was shutting down, succumbing to exhaustion and hypothermia. His strokes became weaker, more erratic. He kept trying to swim, kept trying to find Hero, but his limbs wouldn't respond properly anymore. The darkness was absolute, the water endless, the cold all-consuming. His last coherent thought was of Hero, of her face, of the way she smiled when she first saw him each night. He hoped she would understand. He hoped she would know he had tried. He hoped she would forgive him for failing her. And then the water closed over his head one final time. And Leander, the young man who had defied seas and storms and social conventions for love, sank beneath the waves of the Hellespont and drowned. In her tower, Hero finally managed to relight the lamp. Her hands were still shaking, tears streaming down her face as she held it up to the window. She searched the water frantically, looking for any sign of Leander. But the surface stretched dark and empty before her. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. The eastern sky began to lighten with approaching dawn. She told herself he had turned back. That must be it. When the lamp went out, he had sensibly decided to return to Abydos rather than risk swimming blind. He was safe on the other shore, probably worried about her, but safe. She would see him tomorrow night, or whenever the next safe night arrived. Everything would be fine. It had to be fine. But as full daylight arrived, and the sun rose over the Hellespont, Hero saw something floating in the water near the base of her tower. At first, she couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. Debris from the storm, perhaps. Driftwood. Seaweed. Anything except what her heart already knew it was. She ran from the tower, flew down the winding stairs, stumbled over rocks in her desperate rush to reach the shore. And there, washed up on the rocks at the base of her tower, she found him. Leander's body, pale and cold and lifeless, his dead eyes staring at nothing, his lips blue with death. The sound that came from Hero's throat was barely human, a howl of pure anguish that echoed off the tower walls and across the water. She fell to her knees beside him, pulled his cold body into her arms, cradled his head against her chest. She called his name over and over, as if the sheer force of her love could summon him back from death. She kissed his cold lips, his cold face, his cold hands, trying to warm him with her own body heat, trying to revive him through will alone. But Leander was gone. The sea had taken him. The darkness had swallowed him. All her waiting, all her lamp lighting, all her prayers had come to nothing. He had swum across the Hellespont dozens of times successfully, had defied the odds again and again. But in the end, the sea had claimed its price. Hero rocked back and forth, clutching Leander's body, her mind fracturing under the weight of grief too enormous to be borne. This was her fault. She had lit the lamp. She had beckoned him into the water. She had failed to keep the light burning. If she had simply not lit it at all, he would have stayed safely in Abydos. If she had protected the flame better, he would have made it across. Every decision she had made had led to this moment, to Leander's death, to the destruction of everything that made her life worth living. Without Leander, what was she? A disgraced priestess who had broken her vows, a hollow shell of a person who had given her entire heart to someone who now lay dead in her arms. The future she had imagined, all those dreams they had shared in whispered conversations, vanished like smoke. There would be no spring reunions, no running away together, no life as husband and wife. There was only this, Leander's corpse growing stiff with rigor mortis, and the unbearable knowledge that she had to go on existing in a world he no longer inhabited. But she didn't have to, did she? She looked up at her tower, rising above the shore like a finger pointing at the sky. The same tower where she had waited so many nights, where she had known such joy in Leander's arms, where she had experienced the only genuine happiness of her entire life. It seemed fitting that the tower should serve one final purpose. Hero gently lowered Leander's body back to the rocks, arranging him with tender care, as if he were merely sleeping, and she didn't want to disturb his rest. She kissed him one last time, whispered that she would be with him soon, that death would not separate them for long. Then she rose and walked back up the winding stairs to the top of her tower. The lamp still burned in the window, useless now, a mocking reminder of its failure. Hero picked it up and threw it into the sea, watching it tumble through the air and disappear into the waves that had killed her lover. She stood at the window and looked down at the rocks below, at Leander's body clearly visible in the morning light. It was a long way down, far enough, more than enough. She thought briefly about leaving some kind of message, some explanation for those who would find their bodies. But what was there to say? That she loved him? That seemed inadequate. Too small a phrase to capture the immensity of what she felt. That she couldn't live without him? That was obvious. Would become obvious the moment someone discovered her broken body beside his. No. No words were necessary. Their love would speak for itself, would be written in the final tableau of their joined deaths. Hero climbed onto the window ledge, balanced there for a moment as wind whipped her hair and robes around her body. She looked across the Hellespont one last time toward Abydos, thinking of all the nights she had watched Leander swim toward her from that distant shore. She had believed their love was stronger than anything, that it could overcome any obstacle. She had been wrong. But perhaps in death they could be together in ways that life had prevented. She didn't hesitate, didn't allow herself time for second thoughts or fear. She simply stepped forward into empty air, letting gravity take her, surrendering herself to the same fate that had claimed Leander. For a few seconds, she fell, the wind rushing past her ears, the rocks rushing up to meet her. And then impact, pain that lasted only an instant before darkness swallowed everything. When the other priestesses came looking for Hero later that morning, worried about her absence from morning prayers, they found a scene of devastating tragedy. Two young bodies on the rocks at the base of the tower, Heroes broken and twisted from the fall, Leander's bloated and pale from drowning. It took no great detective work to understand what had happened, to piece together the story of secret love and midnight swims and catastrophic loss. The reactions to the tragedy varied. Some condemned Hero for her broken vows, viewing her death as just punishment for violating her sacred commitment to Aphrodite. Others saw her as a victim of passion, pitying her inability to resist temptation. Still others celebrated her as a romantic heroine, praising her devotion and the depth of her love that made death preferable to life without Leander. Leander's family was devastated, learning only after his death about the dangerous swims he had been making, about the secret affair that had consumed his life. His mother wept for days, unable to be consoled, blaming herself for not somehow knowing, not protecting him from his own reckless passion. His father arranged for proper burial, insisting that despite the circumstances of his death, Leander deserved honor as a brave young man who had loved deeply and purely. The question arose of where to bury them. Tradition dictated that Hero should be interred in Sestos, Leander in Abydos, each returned to their native soil. But something about separating them in death felt wrong, cruel even. They had tried so hard to be together in life, had taken such risks, had paid such a terrible price. Couldn't death at least grant them the unity that life had denied? Eventually, wisdom prevailed. Hero and Leander were buried together on the shore between Sestos and Abydos, at the narrowest point of the Hellespont, where the distance between the lovers' cities was smallest. A single tomb housed both their bodies, their remains finally resting side by side, joined in death, as they could never be in life. The tomb became a landmark for sailors, a reminder of the power of love and the price of passion, a memorial to two young people who chose connection over safety, who dared to reach across divides, who loved each other enough to die for it. The story of Hero and Leander spread far beyond the shores of the Hellespont, resonating across the ancient world and echoing through the centuries that followed. It became one of those foundational tales that poets and artists returned to again and again, finding in it something universal, something that spoke to fundamental human experiences of love and loss, desire and death. But perhaps no one in the post-classical world connected with the story more personally than the English poet Lord Byron, who in May of 1810 decided to test for himself whether Leander's nightly swims were actually possible or merely romantic exaggeration. Byron, along with Lieutenant Aikenhead, a naval officer from the British frigate Salsette, attempted to swim across the Hellespont from the European to the Asian shore, following as closely as possible the route that Leander would have taken. Byron's swim took place on May 3rd, 1810, starting from the European coast at Sestos. The conditions were challenging, with a strong current and cold water, but far from the worst the Hellespont could offer. It took Byron about 70 minutes, or 1 hour and 10 minutes, to complete the crossing, reaching the Asian shore approximately 4 miles downstream from where he started due to the current's pull. He later attempted the swim again on other occasions, each time successfully, though never without significant difficulty. Byron's experience convinced him of two things. First, that Leander's swims were indeed physically possible for a strong swimmer. Second, that they were extraordinarily dangerous, especially under the conditions Leander would have faced, swimming at night, often in rough weather. Without the benefit of modern knowledge about currents and hypothermia, Byron came away from his swims with immense respect for Leander's determination and physical prowess, even as he questioned the wisdom of risking one's life so regularly for romantic purposes. Byron commemorated his swim in a poem called Written After Swimming from Sestos to Abydos, in which he directly addresses Leander. The poem is somewhat irreverent, with Byron suggesting that while he managed the swim just fine, Leander's death proves that love is a disease that leaves you worse off than before you caught it. But beneath the joking tone lies genuine admiration for Leander's devotion and genuine sadness for the tragic outcome of his affair with Hero. Byron's successful swim brought renewed attention to the Hero and Leander story in the early 19th century, inspiring new artistic treatments and rekindling interest in the classical tale. But Byron was far from the first post-classical writer to find inspiration in the legend. Perhaps the most famous English-language treatment of the story came from Christopher Marlowe, the brilliant Elizabethan playwright and poet who began an epic poem called Hero and Leander, shortly before his mysterious death in 1593. Marlowe's poem is a masterpiece of Renaissance literature, taking the basic outline of the ancient story and infusing it with sensuality, wit, and psychological insight that makes the characters feel startlingly modern. His hero is beautiful, but also intelligent and self-aware, conscious of her power over men, and not entirely innocent in using it. His Leander is gorgeous, but also slightly absurd in his passionate excess, so overwhelmed by desire that he becomes comically inarticulate at crucial moments. Marlowe's treatment of their first sexual encounter is particularly remarkable for its frank eroticism and its sympathetic portrayal of Hero's internal conflict. Marlowe doesn't condemn Hero for breaking her vows. Instead, he presents her struggle with enormous compassion, showing her torn between genuine devotion to Aphrodite and equally genuine desire for Leander. When she finally yields, Marlowe describes it not as sin, but as natural, even inevitable, the fulfillment of what both love and the goddess of love would demand. Unfortunately, Marlowe died before completing the poem, leaving it unfinished at the point where Hero and Leander's affair is firmly established, but before the tragic ending. Another poet, George Chapman, later wrote a conclusion attempting to complete Marlowe's work. But Chapman's continuation lacks the spark and sensuality of Marlowe's original verses. Still, even in its incomplete state, Marlowe's Hero and Leander stands as one of the great love poems in English literature, a testament to the enduring power of the ancient tale. The story has inspired countless other artistic treatments across different media and time periods. Renaissance painters depicted Hero in her tower with her lamp, or showed Leander struggling in the waves. Baroque composers wrote operas based on the legend. Romantic poets returned to it repeatedly, finding in Hero and Leander perfect symbols of doomed passion and transcendent devotion. Modern writers have continued to reimagine the tale, sometimes setting it in contemporary contexts, sometimes interrogating its gender dynamics, but always finding something compelling in the core story of love divided by impossible circumstances. What is it about Hero and Leander that continues to resonate across such vast spans of time and culture? Perhaps it's the beautiful simplicity of the central image, the lover swimming through darkness toward a single point of light. That image works as both literal reality and perfect metaphor, capturing something essential about what it feels like to reach desperately toward the object of your desire, to navigate through darkness and danger, guided only by the beacon of hope that the beloved provides. Or perhaps it's the profound tragedy of the ending, the way such small things, an extinguished lamp, a moment of disorientation, lead to such catastrophic consequences. We recognize in their story the fragility of happiness, the way joy can be snatched away in an instant by forces beyond our control. Their death reminds us that love, for all its power to elevate and transform, cannot actually protect us from mortality, from accident, from the indifference of nature to human hopes and dreams. The story also speaks to the universal experience of forbidden love, of wanting someone you're not supposed to want, of having to hide your feelings and your relationship from a world that would condemn or prevent it. Every culture has stories like this, because every culture creates boundaries and taboos around romantic and sexual relationships. And in every culture, people fall in love across those boundaries. Hero and Leander's specific obstacles, her vow of chastity, the geographical separation, may be particular to their story, but the emotional reality of loving someone you can't openly be with remains painfully relevant. There's something powerful, too, in the way their story foregrounds devotion over pragmatism. In our everyday lives, we're taught to be reasonable, to weigh risks against benefits, to make sensible choices. But love, at its most intense, isn't reasonable or sensible. Leander, swimming the Hellespont, night after night, is objectively foolish, risking his life for a few hours of pleasure and companionship. But there's something magnificent about that foolishness, something that speaks to our longing to believe that love is worth any sacrifice, that connection with another human being matters more than safety or longevity or common sense. Hero and Leander also exemplify a particular kind of romantic tragedy, where the lovers' deaths result not from malice or evil, but from circumstance and chance. No villain keeps them apart. No jealous rival plots their destruction. They die because of weather, because of exhaustion, because a lamp goes out at exactly the wrong moment. This makes their story somehow more heartbreaking than tales where lovers are destroyed by human cruelty. At least human cruelty can be fought against, opposed, condemned. But how do you fight the wind? How do you argue with the sea? The story has maintained particular resonance in the region where it originally took place. The Hellespont, now called the Dardanelles, remains a challenging body of water, and the ruins of ancient Sestos and Abydos still mark the shores where Hero waited, and Leander embarked on his swims. In modern times, an annual swimming event called the Hellespont and Dardanelles swim allows participants to cross the strait, following roughly the same route Leander would have taken. Hundreds of swimmers from around the world participate each year, drawn by the challenge and by the romantic associations of the crossing. These modern swimmers complete the journey in daylight, with safety boats accompanying them, with wetsuits to protect against the cold. Even with all these advantages, many find the crossing extremely difficult, testament to just how remarkable Leander's repeated successful swims truly were. The event has become a kind of pilgrimage for those who connect deeply with the legend, a way of honoring the ancient lovers by retracing the path of their doomed romance. The physical location itself has become charged with meaning, transformed from mere geography into sacred space by the weight of the story it carries. Tourists visit the shores, trying to imagine Hero in her tower, trying to picture Leander emerging from the waves. There's something moving about standing in that actual place, looking across that actual water, making the legend tangible in a way that no amount of reading can quite achieve. In the end, what Hero and Leander offer us is a meditation on love's absolute nature, on the way genuine passion refuses to acknowledge limitations or accept compromise. Their story asks us what we would risk for love, what we would sacrifice, what boundaries we would cross. It challenges us to consider whether the intensity of connection they achieved, brief as it was, might be worth more than decades of comfortable but passionless existence. Their tragedy reminds us that choosing love doesn't guarantee happiness, that passion can lead to destruction as easily as fulfillment. But it also suggests that the alternative, denying love for the sake of safety or propriety, creates its own kind of tragedy, a slow death of the spirit rather than a dramatic death of the body. Hero could have refused to light her lamp that first night, could have maintained her vows and lived out her days as a respected priestess. But would that have been a better life? Or just a longer one? We can't know what Hero and Leander would have chosen had they known how their story would end. Would Leander still have swum if he'd known the Hellespont would claim his life? Would Hero still have lit her lamp if she'd foreseen watching Leander drown, then choosing death over life without him? Perhaps. Perhaps their love was so consuming, so absolute, that even foreknowledge of tragedy wouldn't have changed their choices. The intensity of what they felt for each other existed outside rational calculation, beyond the arithmetic of risk and reward. There's a particular poignancy to the way their story centers on light and darkness, presence and absence, connection and separation. Hero's lamp becomes the physical manifestation of hope, the tangible symbol of her love calling to Leander across the water. When she lights it, she's saying, "I'm here. I'm waiting. Come to me." When he swims toward it, he's answering, "I hear you. I'm coming. Nothing will keep me away." The lamp creates a conversation between them across distance, a dialogue conducted not in words, but in light and movement, in waiting and arriving. The extinguishing of that lamp at the crucial moment feels almost comically cruel, as if the universe itself conspired against them. And yet, there's something fitting about it too. Their entire relationship existed in defiance of natural order, a priestess breaking her vows, a young man risking death nightly for passion. The lamp going out represents reality reasserting itself, the world reminding them that some boundaries cannot be crossed indefinitely without consequences. But even in their deaths, even in the tragedy of the ending, there's a strange triumph. They loved completely, without reservation or compromise. They experienced a depth of connection that most people never know. They felt something worth dying for, and when death came, they faced it together, rather than living on separated and diminished. Their story doesn't have a happy ending, but it has an authentic one, true to the extremity of emotion that defined their love from the beginning. The legend of Hero and Leander has also raised interesting questions about gender, power, and agency within romantic relationships. On the surface, Leander appears to be the active partner, the one who literally moves toward Hero each night, who takes physical risks, who demonstrates his devotion through action. Hero, confined to her tower, seems passive by comparison, limited to the domestic sphere, able only to wait and watch and tend to Leander after his exertions. But a closer examination reveals a more complex dynamic. Hero's decision to light the lamp that first night represents an enormous act of courage and transgression. she is breaking sacred vows, risking her position and reputation, defying the goddess she serves. The social consequences of discovery would fall far more heavily on her than on Leander. If their affair came to light, he might be embarrassed or criticized, but she would be utterly destroyed, cast out of the temple in disgrace, possibly subjected to legal punishment for violating her religious commitments. So, while Leander's physical courage in swimming the Hellespont is obvious and impressive, Hero's oral courage in choosing to light that lamp and welcome him into her bed should not be underestimated. She is making an active choice to prioritize her own desires over her duties, to claim ownership of her body and her sexuality in a society that insisted women, especially religious women, had no such rights. Her action is radical, revolutionary even, a quiet but profound rebellion against the structures that sought to control her. The lamp itself takes on interesting symbolic weight when viewed through this lens. Hero doesn't passively wait for Leander to find her. She actively guides him, provides the beacon that makes his journey possible. Without her light, he would be lost, literally and figuratively. She is not merely the prize at the end of his heroic journey, but an active participant in making that journey possible. The lamp represents her agency, her power, her contribution to their shared enterprise of love. When the lamp goes out on that fatal night, it's not just a mechanical failure, but the loss of Hero's ability to protect and guide her lover. She experiences the extinguishing of the flame as a personal failure, a betrayal of her responsibility to keep Leander safe. The fact that the wind, rather than her carelessness, extinguishes it doesn't lessen her sense of guilt. She had one job: keep the light burning, and she failed. And Leander died because of that failure. This interpretation helps explain why Hero's suicide feels not just tragic, but somehow necessary within the logic of the story. It's not merely that she cannot bear to live without Leander, though that's certainly part of it. It's also that she has failed in her fundamental duty as the keeper of the light, as the one who promised to guide him safely home. His death is on her hands, or at least that's how she experiences it. And the only way to atone for that failure is to join him in death. The gendered nature of their roles also reflects broader patterns in how ancient Greek and Roman culture understood romantic relationships. Men were expected to be active, aggressive, pursuing. Women were expected to be passive, receptive, prizes to be won. But within those constraints, real people with real emotions found ways to exercise agency and power, to negotiate relationships that provided them with intimacy and connection, even when those relationships didn't conform to social ideals. Hero and Leander's relationship exists in the margins, in the darkness, in secret. And perhaps that secrecy is precisely what allows Hero to claim more agency than she might in a conventional, publicly acknowledged courtship. In the privacy of her tower, away from the eyes of priests and parents and society at large, she and Leander can interact as equals, can negotiate the terms of their relationship, can express desires, and make choices that would be impossible in daylight. This liminality, this existence in the spaces between Europe and Asia, between land and sea, between darkness and dawn, between sacred duty and profane desire, characterizes the entire story. Hero and Leander occupy a threshold space where normal rules don't quite apply, where transformation becomes possible, where new ways of being and relating can be imagined and enacted. But threshold spaces are inherently unstable, and the lover's inability to sustain their liminal existence forever is perhaps inevitable. The story also engages with interesting questions about the relationship between divine and human will. Hero serves Aphrodite, the goddess of love and desire, yet has taken vows of chastity that prevent her from experiencing those very things. This paradox suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of the goddess's nature and desires. Aphrodite is not about denial or restraint. She represents the life force itself, the creative and destructive power of desire, the drive toward connection and pleasure that animates all living things. When Hero chooses to love Leander, when she breaks her vows to experience passion, she could be seen as actually honoring Aphrodite more truly than she did through her sterile temple service. Leander himself makes this argument when trying to convince Hero to sleep with him, suggesting that virginal priestesses are insulting rather than honoring the goddess of love. While this is obviously self-serving rhetoric on his part, it carries a certain logical force. The ancient world struggled with questions about the relationship between divine service and human nature, about whether honoring the gods required suppressing natural desires or fulfilling them. Different religious traditions answered these questions differently, but the tension between ascetic denial and embodied celebration of life ran through much of ancient religious thought. Hero and Leander's story explores this tension, ultimately coming down on the side of embodiment, of experience, of saying yes to desire, even when that yes carries terrible costs. Yet the story doesn't present this choice as simple or uncomplicated. Hero genuinely struggles with her decision to break her vows. She experiences real guilt and conflict, not just before the first time she sleeps with Leander, but throughout their relationship. Her love for him coexists with her sense that she has betrayed something sacred, that she has violated promises that mattered. This complexity makes her more sympathetic, more human, more real than if she had simply abandoned her vows without a second thought. Similarly, Leander's decision to keep swimming despite growing dangers reflects a complicated mix of devotion, pride, stubbornness, and perhaps a touch of death wish. He is genuinely devoted to Hero, genuinely willing to risk everything for her. But there's also an element of performance in his swims, a need to prove himself, to demonstrate his worthiness through spectacular feats of endurance. His love for Hero is intertwined with his need to be seen as heroic, to star in an epic romance worthy of being told and retold. This doesn't make his love less genuine, but it does make it more complicated. Real human emotions are always complicated, always mixed with other motivations and needs. Pure, uncomplicated love exists mainly in inferior fiction. The fact that Hero and Leander have complex, sometimes contradictory motivations makes them feel more authentic, more worthy of our emotional investment in their fate. The role of fate versus free will in their story has been debated by scholars and readers for centuries. Are Hero and Leander simply acting out a predetermined tragedy, victims of fate who never had any real choice? Or do they make genuine decisions that shape their destiny, bearing responsibility for the consequences of those choices? The answer likely lies somewhere between these extremes. Certainly, factors beyond their control shape the basic parameters of their situation. They happen to live on opposite sides of the Hellespont. Hero happens to be a priestess bound by vows. The weather that night happens to be terrible. The wind happens to blow just hard enough to extinguish the lamp at the worst possible moment. All of these circumstances seem to conspire toward their tragic end, suggesting the hand of fate at work. But within those constraints, Hero and Leander make choices. Hero chooses to light the lamp that first night. Leander chooses to swim. They choose to continue their affair through the summer, despite growing risks. Leander chooses to enter the water on that fatal night, despite the dangerous conditions. Hero chooses to jump from her tower rather than live on without him. Each of these decisions is freely made, reflecting their characters, their values, their desires. Perhaps the most accurate way to understand their story is as a collaboration between fate and free will. Fate provides the circumstances, the challenges, the framework within which the lovers must operate. But how they respond to those circumstances, how they navigate those challenges, how they exist within that framework, these are matters of choice. Their tragedy results from the intersection of external forces they cannot control and internal choices they absolutely can. This reading preserves both the sense that their doom was somehow inevitable, that they were marked for tragedy from the beginning, and the sense that they actively participated in creating that doom, that different choices might have led to different outcomes. It respects both the ancient Greek notion that humans exist under the sway of fate and the more modern insistence on individual agency and responsibility. The story's enduring power also stems from its archetypal quality, the way it distills certain fundamental patterns of human experience into their purest form. The lover crossing dangerous waters toward a light in the darkness, the beloved waiting and watching, unable to do anything but hope, the crucial moment of failure leading to irreversible loss, the grief so profound that it demands death as its only adequate response. These are patterns that recur across cultures and throughout history, suggesting they touch something deep in the human psyche. Psychologically, the story can be read as exploring the risks inherent in emotional vulnerability, in allowing yourself to need another person so completely that their loss becomes unbearable. In some sense, Hero and Leander's tragedy begins not with the extinguished lamp, but with their first meeting, with that initial decision to love, to open themselves to another person, to make their happiness dependent on someone else's continued presence in their lives. This vulnerability is terrifying precisely because it exposes us to the possibility of devastating loss. When we love deeply, we give another person the power to destroy us. Their death, their betrayal, their simple decision to leave can unmake us, can render our lives meaningless, can take away our reason for existing. Hero and Leander's story pushes this vulnerability to its logical extreme, showing what happens when love becomes so absolute that survival without the beloved becomes literally impossible. Yet the story doesn't suggest that avoiding such vulnerability is the answer. Despite the tragic ending, despite the suffering and death, there's no sense that Hero and Leander would have been better off never meeting, never loving, never opening themselves to each other. The summer they spent together, those nights of passion and conversation and connection are presented as having inherent value regardless of how the story ends. They experienced something real and profound and beautiful, and that experience justified itself even though it led to their deaths. This is perhaps the story's most radical claim, that love at its most intense is worth the price it demands, even when that price is everything. Most of us will never face such an extreme test, will never be asked to literally die for love. But we all face smaller versions of the same question. Is connection worth the risk of loss? Is intimacy worth the vulnerability it requires? Is it better to feel deeply and suffer greatly, or to protect ourselves through emotional distance and thereby avoid the worst pain, but also the greatest joy? Hero and Leander answer these questions through their actions. They choose connection over safety, passion over prudence, depth over duration. They pack more genuine living into their brief summer together than many people experience in long lifetimes of careful, protected existence. When death comes for them, they have no regrets about having loved, only grief that their love must end. The visual imagery of the story has proven endlessly fascinating to artists across centuries and media. The iconic image of Hero in her tower, lamp held high, scanning the dark water for signs of Leander, has been painted, sketched, sculpted, and photographed countless times. Each artist brings their own interpretation, but certain elements remain constant. The vertical tower, emphasizing Hero's elevation and isolation. The horizontal expanse of water, emphasizing distance and danger. The single point of light, connecting them across that dangerous space. Depictions of Leander in the water range from the heroic to the pathetic. Some artists show him powerful and confident, muscular arms cutting through the waves, face determined, clearly in control of his element. Others emphasize his vulnerability, showing him small against the vast sea, struggling against currents, too strong for him, already half drowned before the final disaster strikes. Both interpretations have validity, capturing different aspects of his nightly crossings. The death scenes have particularly captured artistic imagination. The image of Leander's body washed up on the rocks, Hero discovering him, her face contorted in anguish. This moment of recognition and loss has been rendered in every medium and style. Some artists emphasize the violence of death, showing Leander's body battered by rocks, Hero's fall from the tower explicitly depicted. Others take a more romantic approach, showing both bodies peaceful in death, reunited at last, their faces serene, as if they're merely sleeping. The double death particularly resonates with Romantic-era artists and writers who were obsessed with the intersection of love and death, with passion so intense it could only be consummated through mortality. The image of Hero throwing herself from the tower to join Leander in death became a favorite subject for painters who wanted to capture extreme emotion, to show the decisive moment when grief overcomes survival instinct, when love proves stronger than life itself. Modern retellings of the story have tended to focus on adding psychological depth and context that ancient sources leave implicit. Contemporary novelists and playwrights have imagined Hero's life before meeting Leander, exploring what might have led a young woman to accept priesthood and its constraints. They've developed Leander's character beyond the handsome youth of the original, giving him doubts and fears and complications. They've sometimes added secondary characters, friends, rivals, family members, who comment on and complicate the central romance. Some modern versions question or invert elements of the traditional story. Feminist retellings might give Hero more agency, have her perhaps attempt the swim herself, or refuse Leander's first advances until he proves himself worthy. LGBTQ retellings might transform one or both lovers, exploring how the story changes when told about same-sex passion facing different but equally real obstacles. These reinterpretations don't invalidate the original, but show its flexibility, its ability to carry multiple meanings and speak to diverse audiences across time. The story has also migrated into popular culture in various forms. References to Hero and Leander appear in everything from comic books to television shows to popular songs. Usually, these references are shorthand for doomed love, for passion that ends in tragedy, for the romantic notion that some loves are too intense to survive in the ordinary world. The specific details of the story may be lost, but the emotional essence remains recognizable and potent. Educational uses of the story have shifted over time. In the classical world, and through much of the medieval and early modern periods, Hero and Leander served primarily as a cautionary tale, warning against excessive passion, against breaking sacred vows, against taking foolish risks for momentary pleasure. The tragic ending was seen as punishment for transgression, a demonstration that certain boundaries should not be crossed. More recently, educational approaches tend to treat the story as an exploration of universal themes: love, loss, sacrifice, the tension between duty and desire. Rather than offering clear moral lessons, contemporary teachers use the story to prompt discussion about complex questions that don't have simple answers. What obligations do we owe to institutions versus to ourselves? When is sacrifice noble, and when is it foolish? How do we balance security with passion, reason with emotion? The story also serves as an excellent introduction to classical mythology more broadly, exemplifying many of the themes and concerns that run through Greek and Roman myth. The intervention of gods in human affairs, the tension between fate and free will, the catastrophic consequences of transgressing social and religious boundaries, the nobility of suffering for love, all of these are core mythological concerns that Hero and Leander's story explores in concentrated form. For students of literature, the story offers rich material for analysis. The symbolism is clear enough to be accessible, but complex enough to reward close reading. The geographical setting plays a crucial role in the narrative, making this a good example of how location shapes story. The multiple ancient and modern versions allow for comparative study, showing how different authors handle the same basic material. The story's influence on later literature can be traced through centuries of Western writing, demonstrating how classical texts continue to shape contemporary culture. The annual Hellespont swim competition has become a way for people to physically engage with the story, to test themselves against the same challenge Leander faced. Participants report that swimming the strait gives them new appreciation for his achievement and new horror at the thought of doing it repeatedly, at night, in all weather. The cold water, the strong currents, the considerable distance, all of these become viscerally real in a way that reading about them cannot convey. Some swimmers dedicate their crossings to lost loves, using the swim as a memorial or a way of processing grief. Others see it as a test of personal limits, a challenge that pushes them beyond their comfort zones. Still others participate simply for the thrill of swimming the same waters that play such a crucial role in this famous story, of inserting themselves into a narrative that has survived more than 2,000 years. The Turkish and Greek communities around the Dardanelles have embraced the story as part of their local heritage, maintaining sites associated with the legend, telling visitors about the ancient lovers, keeping the memory alive through festivals and commemorations. There's pride in being the custodians of this tale, in living on the shores where Hero and Leander loved and died. Tourism, driven by interest in the story, brings economic benefits to the region, but it also creates a living connection between past and present, between ancient myth and contemporary experience. When tourists stand on the shore and look across the water, they're seeing essentially the same view Hero and Leander saw, the same narrow strait that divided and connected them. That continuity across millennia creates a powerful sense of connection to the ancient world, a feeling that these long-dead lovers were real people whose emotions and experiences weren't so different from our own. The story's universality means it continues to find new audiences and new relevance with each generation. The specific circumstances may be ancient, but the emotions are timeless. Anyone who has ever loved across distance, anyone who has ever waited anxiously for a lover's arrival, anyone who has ever taken risks for romance, anyone who has ever experienced devastating loss, which is to say, nearly everyone, can find something recognizable in Hero and Leander's tale. In our current age of instant communication, the physical separation that defined Hero and Leander's relationship might seem less relevant. We can video chat with lovers on other continents, can send messages that arrive in seconds rather than days. But technology hasn't eliminated the fundamental experience of longing, of missing someone, of counting hours until reunion. We still understand what it means to watch for signs of a beloved's approach, to fear loss, to feel that someone's absence creates a void nothing else can fill. If anything, the story might resonate even more strongly now, precisely because so many modern relationships struggle to maintain intensity and passion amid the distractions and demands of contemporary life. Hero and Leander's love was concentrated, distilled to its essence by the obstacles they faced. They had only a few hours together each night, which made those hours infinitely precious. They faced real danger, which made their choice to be together meaningful and consequential. Their relationship existed outside normal social structures, which freed them from certain conventions while exposing them to certain risks. Modern relationships rarely face such dramatic challenges, but perhaps that's partly why they often feel less intense, less meaningful, less transformative. When everything is permitted and nothing is particularly difficult, passion can fade into comfortable habit. Hero and Leander remind us that difficulty can actually enhance connection, that obstacles can intensify emotion, that fighting for love can be part of what makes love worth having. This isn't to suggest we should seek out unnecessary hardship in relationships, or that healthy modern partnerships are somehow inferior to tragic ancient ones. But there is something to be learned from Hero and Leander's absolute commitment, their willingness to prioritize their relationship above safety and convenience, their insistence that some experiences justify any cost. As we reach the end of this tale, we're left with images that haunt the imagination. The lamp burning in the tower window, calling across dark water. The strong young swimmer cutting through waves toward that beacon of hope. The desperate woman watching from above, powerless to do anything but wait. The extinguished flame, the drowning man, the grieving beloved choosing death over life without love. Two bodies on the rocks, finally united in the stillness of death. These images have survived more than 2 millennia because they capture something essential about the human experience of love, its power, its beauty, its danger, its cost. Hero and Leander loved completely, without reservation, without compromise. They experienced connection so profound that separation became intolerable. They felt passion worth dying for, and when death came, they faced it together. Their story asks us to consider what we truly value, what we would risk for connection, what price we're willing to pay for the chance to love and be loved deeply. It challenges our comfortable assumption that safety and longevity are the highest goods, suggesting that intensity and authenticity might matter more. It reminds us that the best things in life often come with the highest costs, that nothing truly valuable is ever completely safe, that opening yourself to another person always carries the risk of devastating loss. But it also insists that the risk is worth taking. That love, even love that ends in tragedy, is better than no love at all. That the summer hero and Leander spent together, those stolen hours of passion and conversation and connection, had value that transcended their briefness. That some experiences justify themselves simply by existing, regardless of what comes after. In the end, Hero and Leander offer us a vision of love in its purest, most absolute form. Love that asks everything, that accepts no substitutes, that recognizes no barriers, that chooses intensity over duration, depth over safety, connection over survival. Their tragedy reminds us that such love cannot exist indefinitely in the ordinary world, that it burns too hot to be sustained, that it consumes what it touches. But their story also suggests that even brief encounters with such love change us permanently, give meaning to existence, make life worth living, even when that life ends too soon. So we remember them, Hero and Leander, the priestess in her tower, and the swimmer who crossed the Hellespont for love. We remember them because their story, for all its ancient specificity, speaks to something timeless in the human heart. We remember them because they dared to love completely in a world that prefers careful hedging of emotional bets. We remember them because they show us what passion looks like when taken to its logical extreme. We remember them because in some secret part of ourselves, we envy their intensity even as we mourn their loss. Their bodies rest somewhere beneath the soil near the Dardanelles, those bones long since returned to dust. But their story lives on, passed from generation to generation, from culture to culture, finding new meaning in each retelling while maintaining its essential truth. As long as people fall in love across distances, as long as passion conflicts with duty, as long as we struggle to balance safety with desire, Hero and Leander will remain relevant, will continue to move us, will keep calling to us across the dark waters of time. If you found something meaningful in their story, if Hero's lamp burning in the darkness touched something in your heart, if Leander's determination to reach his beloved despite all obstacles inspired you, then consider hitting that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more explorations of mythology's greatest love stories, tales of passion and devotion that have echoed through the centuries. Share this video with someone you love, someone whose presence in your life feels worth any risk, any sacrifice. And in the comments below, tell me what Hero and Leander's story means to you, how it connects to your own experiences of love and loss, longing and connection. Until next time, sleep well, dream deeply, and remember that the greatest loves are those that dare to cross dark waters toward a single point of light, that risk everything for the chance to connect, that choose passion over safety and depth over duration. Remember Hero and Leander, and may their love light your way through whatever darkness you face. Good night.